Does the Bible teach that the earth is flat? The belief that the earth is flat has since about 2012 been on the rise, particularly in Western nations such as the United States and Canada. Now, although many nominal Christians sort of are flat earthers, the community is actually quite eclectic, with devotees having a variety of beliefs ranging from the New Age spiritualism to deism all the way to pantheism. Now, surprisingly, many conservative evangelical Christians seem to have also been caught up within this growing movement. Now, although a plethora of YouTube videos discuss this topic from a scientific perspective, there is very, very little content from a scriptural perspective, most likely because Christian leaders think the phenomenon is so absurd it requires no apologetic critique. Yet many sincere Christians are being led astray because they are told that the Bible not only teaches that the earth is flat, but that rejecting this interpretation is tantamount to being deceived by Satan. Now, if that is you, then let me say at the outset that my goal in this video series is not to misjudge or ridicule you. I fully understand the tension that exists between science and scripture, and I admire a tenacious desire to put God's word first. As I will show, however, there is no need for concern. The Bible categorically does not teach that the earth is flat. Give me just 15 minutes and I'll show you why. Okay, so with all that said, let's get started. Now, one of the most common arguments that flat earthers use to support their model is the scriptural evidence describing the apparent movement of the sun through the sky. So verses like Psalm 51, "The mighty God, even the Lord, hath spoken and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof." Now, as it turns out, there are multiple verses that say something like this in one form or another. So how should the Christian respond? Well, I think the first thing that we need to keep in mind before going forward is to recognize that verses such as these have got nothing to do with whether the earth is a flat circular disc or a sphere. Does the movement of the sun through the sky, whether the sun is moving apparently or in a real way, have any bearing whatsoever on the flatness or sphericity of earth? And the answer is no. As it turns out, passages related to the sun's rising and setting are used as proof texts by those endorsing another belief called geocentrism, and that is that the earth is stationary with the sun orbiting the earth. The heliocentric model has earth orbiting a stationary sun. So although these passages don't argue for or against a flat earth, they are used in tandem with other scriptural passages by flat earthers to help leverage their overall flat earth model. Now, I point this out because unfortunately many Christians don't know this. So to emphasize, scriptures that talk about the rising and the setting of the sun do not, one way or the other, prove that the earth is a flat round disc, a circular sphere, or even a square cube for that matter. Now, since, however, these verses are discussed in flat earth literature, then it will be important to address them. Now, the key to understanding all of these texts can be found in the language that's being used. It is phenomenological. Now, that simply means that the language being used, it's true to the person experiencing the phenomenon. Now, it is the language of appearances. Even today, and given our heliocentric worldview, we will still say that the sun rises and the sun sets. All of us use observational language every day, whether we are talking to our wife about a beautiful sunset or to our child whose shoes just keep getting smaller. Clear examples of this phenomenological approach can also be found elsewhere in the Bible. For example, in Acts 27:27, Luke says, "And when the 14th night came, we, being borne up and down in the Adria, toward the middle of the night, the sailors were supposing that some country drew nigh to them." The literal Greek here clearly says that it was the land that drew near to the ship, not the ship drawing near to the land. Now, most modern translations have made this explicit by taking out the ambiguity. The King James Version, for example, says, "But when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country." But the Greek is not ambiguous. It was the land that drew near to the ship. It's clearly an absurdity if taken in an overly literal sense. Now, there is no problem with the text, however, if we understand that Luke was using the language of appearances. Now, as it turns out, there is another kind of language that people use to describe reality, and this is called theoretical language. Now, when using theoretical language, the person is wanting to get to the very heart of natural phenomena. Now, this way of describing reality, it deals with the way things work, and it's akin to modern methods of scientific investigation. Aristotle, for example, used theoretical or scientific language when he described Earth's sphericity more than 2,400 years ago. Now, both ways of talking about reality are true, but importantly, they have completely different goals. The Bible rarely uses theoretical or scientific language and almost always uses the language of observation or appearance because this is the normal way of referencing aspects of the real world. I challenge you to try and describe a sunset using theoretical language by keeping all reference to observation out of your description. You'll find that your description will sound quite strange and weird. And that's because all of us use phenomenological language all the time, every day. In fact, the only time that you'll come across theoretical language is when someone is trying to show you how something works, like when you're at school listening to your earth science teacher. Now, quite honestly, I think this distinction between phenomenological and theoretical language, it should be enough to satisfy most people's objections. But as it turns out, it isn't. Someone could object and state that the use of phenomenological or observational language, it cannot work as a solution because most ancient cultures actually believed in a flat earth, and all of them believed that the sun, the moon, and the stars orbited a stationary earth. So when David penned Psalm 51, he did so as a geocentric flat earther. Now, this objection, it's usually put forward by both liberal theologians and Bible-believing flat earthers. The liberal theologians will say that David was mistaken, and so the Bible has errors, while flat earthers will say that David was correct, thus proving that the Bible supports a geocentric flat earth cosmology. But, and this is really important, does it really matter what David believed? For example, if a bona fide geocentric flat earther said that this evening's sunset was exceptionally stunning, is his statement in error just because he believes that the sun is objectively moving through the sky? And the answer is no. If you did not know that the person was a geocentric flat earther, you'd not only be none the wiser, but you would probably encourage his statement by reciprocating in the affirmative. Yes, it most definitely was stunning, especially as the sun slipped under the horizon, setting off that dazzling light show against the backdrop of the clouds. You see, phenomenological language is always true, regardless of what the person believes. Now, that means that David's statement about the movement of the sun through the sky was completely accurate, regardless of whether he believed in a flat earth, a spherical earth, or even if he'd never really given it much thought at all. It just doesn't matter. But what about when it's God who is speaking, as in Malachi 1:11? For from the rising of the sun even to the going down of the same, my name shall be great among the Gentiles. Yet even here we can appeal to the use of phenomenological language and not theoretical language. God is speaking through a prophet to people of Israel who are located on the earth. This language, it's also couched in symbolism. The idea is that one day all people shall worship God all the time. That's the point. God is not teaching us about planetary motion. Now think about it. If God revealed himself through a modern prophet today, and that prophet spoke these words to all the nations of the planet, the message would not include any reference to the rotation of the earth. That would be just plain weird. It would be stated exactly as it is recorded in Malachi. Of course, even this solution, the phenomenological solution, whereby it doesn't matter what people believe, even that is not going to please all of the critics. The Bible, as God's authoritative word, this is what the critics will say, it's responsible to ensure that it speaks to that which is real. So whenever the Bible appeals to observational reality, then the onus is on God to speak as accurately as possible about the natural world. If he doesn't, then either the Bible is in error, that's the liberal approach, or the spherical heliocentric view of modern science is wrong, that's the view of the modern geocentric flat earther. So, for example, when Joshua said to the Lord, "Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon," and the sun stood still and the moon stayed, then the sun literally stood still. But as Bible scholar Vern Poythress has astutely observed, using words like real or reality, it's often fraught with all sorts of problems when discussing motion. To correctly suggest that it is the earth that actually moves and not the sun can itself turn into a false statement depending on one's relative frame of reference. Is it true, for example, to say that the sun is stationary? If I was positioned on a planet in a neighboring galaxy and then given the appropriate experimental equipment, I would see the sun, the earth, and in fact the entire solar system move in an orbit around the center of the Milky Way, at least according to my heliocentric view of the universe. So given that frame of reference, the statement about a stationary sun would prove false. You see, the quest to find a universal body that is truly at rest is, as all astronomers know, elusive. Everything is in motion, and so the language of motion is absolutely dependent on one's frame of reference. And this is why Poythress says, as the theory of relativity has made amply evident, to eliminate the observational standpoint is to eliminate the very ability to talk coherently about motion and rest. In a real sense, then, it was scientifically accurate for Joshua to say, relative to him, that the sun actually, in an objective sense, stood still. Consider these words from astronomer and young age creationist Dr. Danny Faulkner. Since all we can ever measure is relative motion, in many respects we are free to use whatever standard of rest we wish. Therefore, in a very real sense, the sun does rise and set each day. I'm not appealing merely to appearance or saying that sunrise and sunset are phenomenological. I'm saying that in a very real sense, the sun does move in the sky each day. Now, personally, I find the phenomenological explanation just as convincing. But if you're really struggling with that, then you have the freedom to look at things from an earthbound frame of reference. Okay, finally, as it turns out, flat earthers must themselves engage in the language of appearances. And that's because in all flat earth models, the sun never dips below the horizon. Notice that the sun is not rising or setting. It is merely going around and around in a circuit. Flat earthers themselves thus explain sunrise and sunset in terms of appearances. Okay, in the next video, I will get into all the nitty-gritty about verses describing the ends, the four corners, the circle, the foundation, and the pillars of the earth, so stay tuned. So that's all from me, Ken Colson here at Creation Unfolding. Look, please go ahead, if this video was useful, then go ahead and pound that like button and share this video on all of your social media platforms. Of course, I always appreciate prayer, so spend a few seconds even. I would really appreciate that in prayer. There is a button you'll find in the description if you would like to give. That's always appreciated. And until next time, we'll see you then. Thank you and goodbye.